The rising sun painted the sky in hues of pink and orange, casting long shadows through the gaps in the curtains. The room was silent except for the soft snores coming from the corner. Daniel slept peacefully, oblivious to the turmoil that awaited him. On the other side of the room, Emily lay frozen in fear, her eyes wide open, staring at the blood-stained knife lying on the pillow next to her. How did we get here? What has happened? Who is responsible for this carnage? These questions echoed in her mind as she cautiously scanned the room. The once pristine white sheets were now a macabre canvas splattered with blood. The faint scent of copper filled the air, mingling with the lingering aroma of roses from the previous night's festivities. The room was a mess, furniture overturned, drawers emptied, as if someone had ransacked the room in a blind rage. But where was Claire? Did she flee, or was she still hiding in the shadows? Emily wanted to scream, to call out for help, but her voice caught in her throat. Fear, thick and suffocating, pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had to get out of there, find help. But the sight of Daniel, his peaceful face marred only by the blood that stained his neck, kept her rooted to the spot. The events of the night before rushed back. The uneasiness, the fleeting glance between Claire and Daniel, the sudden realization that Claire was missing from their after-party celebration. Had it all been part of a sinister plan? The thought both horrified and enraged her. With trembling hands, she reached out to touch Daniel, to confirm he was real, to make sure this nightmare wasn't just a figment of her imagination. His skin was cold, his breathing shallow. She knew in that moment he was gone, lost to the violent whims of a jealous heart. But how could this have happened? Who could have done such a thing, and where was Claire? Driven by a mix of grief and anger, Emily stumbled out of bed, determined to find answers. She searched the room frantically, moving aside curtains, lifting the duvet, desperate to uncover any clue that could explain what had transpired. Her eyes fell on the window, slightly ajar, and she approached it cautiously. Outside, the morning mist hung heavy, shrouding the landscape in an eerie silence. Whoever had done this had fled, leaving behind a trail of blood and unanswered questions. As Emily stepped back, she noticed a glint of metal on the floor, a small silver mirror lying face down. With shaking hands, she picked it up and turned it over. Etched onto its surface was a single word: Jezebel. The name sent a chill down her spine. It was Claire's middle name, a name she hadn't heard in years. Suddenly, the pieces of the night before began to fit into place, the lingering glances, the whispers in the dark. The thought that her own stepsister could be capable of such violence seemed preposterous. Yet the evidence stared back at her from the cold surface of the mirror. Driven by a morbid curiosity and the need to gather more evidence, Emily reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed 911. In the distance, sirens wailed, their sound carrying on the morning breeze. The operator's voice crackled through the phone, asking calm, concise questions that Emily answered in hushed tones. The stark contrast between the idyllic surroundings and the horrific crime scene pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. As the minutes ticked by, the room seemed to close in on her, suffocating her with its secrets. Each question from the operator brought back memories of the night before, each answer pushing her deeper into a nightmare she never could have imagined. The luxurious fabrics, the expensive perfume, the gourmet chocolates on the bedside table suddenly seemed grotesque, a mocking reminder of the life that had been brutally interrupted. The phone call ended, leaving Emily in silence once again. The weight of what had happened pressed down on her, threatening to crush her. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly betrayed. The person she trusted to be by her side, the person who had pledged to love and cherish her, was now a lifeless form on the bed behind her. The vibrant laughter and promises of forever had turned to ashes in her mouth. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains, the room was filled with the chilling reality of the situation. The sheets were soaked in blood, the walls stained with violence, and the air heavy with the metallic scent of death. Emily found herself trapped in a labyrinth of emotions, fear, grief, anger, and above all, a deep sense of betrayal. The idyllic wedding celebration had been nothing but a facade, a thin veneer over a darkness that had now consumed everything. As the police arrived, their presence bringing with it the promise of justice, Emily knew her life would never be the same. The scars of this tragedy ran deep, reaching far beyond the physical wounds that marred the room. The pristine white of the sheets now a grim reminder of the purity of her love that had been brutally violated. The rose petals scattered on the bed, a cruel jest, mocking the romance they once symbolized. The champagne, meant to toast their happiness, was now a bitter reminder of the celebration that turned into a massacre. The very walls of the room seemed to whisper tales of anguish, bearing witness to the violent end of a love story that was supposed to have had a happily ever after. The quaint countryside hotel room, once a sanctuary for a newly married couple, had become a crime scene. The luxurious bedding was now a macabre backdrop for a horror story, the expensive drapes framing a tragedy that shook the very foundations of Emily's world. The room was a tomb, a silent testament to a love that was brutally cut short. The comfortable bed, once a symbol of intimacy and passion, was now a cold slab where Daniel's lifeless body lay. The plush carpet, meant to be trodden on by two people in love, was stained with the crimson evidence of a jealous crime. The elegant curtains, once providing privacy for a couple in their intimate moments, now hid the tearful breakdown of a grieving bride. The spacious closet, where clothes hung neatly in anticipation of romantic evenings, was now a grim reminder of a future that would never be. The bathroom, complete with a jacuzzi and a vanity mirror, reflected the horror that had unfolded within its walls. The wedding suite, designed for romance and celebration, had become a chamber of horrors, the very air thick with the stench of death and the memory of a love brutally extinguished. Emily stood amidst the ruins of her dreams, the remnants of a shattered life scattered around her like fallen autumn leaves. The once promising dawn had turned into a day of despair, marking not the beginning of a new life, but the end of one. The morning after her wedding, instead of being filled with hope and the joy of a new beginning, had become synonymous with tragedy, betrayal, and the haunting specter of death. For Emily, that morning was more than just a day. It was a turning point, a moment when her world fractured, leaving her stranded in a wasteland of grief and unanswered questions. The afternoon dragged on, turning the hotel suite into a cage of regret. Sunlight streamed in, mockingly illuminating the dust motes dancing in its beams. Outside, the sounds of the city were muffled, unable to penetrate the dense quiet that had settled within the room. Emily sat by the window, her gaze fixed on the distant buildings. The vibrant colors of the cityscape seemed to mock her, a stark contrast to the monochrome emotions churning inside her. She felt betrayed, foolish, stripped bare by the events of the previous night. The image of Claire's triumphant smile played on repeat in her mind, a constant reminder of her failure. Time, which usually brought solace, seemed to stand still. Each minute stretched, amplifying the silence that pressed against her eardrums. She was aware of Daniel in the room, his presence a phantom limb, both felt and not seen. Yet she refused to turn to acknowledge him. She wouldn't offer him the satisfaction of witnessing her pain. Hours passed, marked only by the slow creep of the sun across the sky. The initial anger that had boiled within her began to recede, leaving behind a hollow ache. She was unsure if it was the lingering effects of the champagne or the haunting memories that clouded her vision, but the world seemed distorted, as though viewed through a fogged-up window. Around her, the trappings of luxury did little to ease the turmoil in her chest. The plush carpet, the expensive fabrics, the sleek furniture, all served as a constant reminder of her status, her role in a game she never asked to play. Then came the knock. Gentle but firm, it announced the arrival of someone new, someone whose presence would shift the balance of the room. Emily didn't turn. She knew who it was before the door opened, before the familiar perfume drifted in. She could sense Claire's arrival like a predator sensing its prey. There was an easy confidence in Claire's stride, a quiet triumph in her posture that spoke volumes without a sound. "Enjoying the view," Claire said, her voice a melodic intrusion into the quiet. Her eyes flicked toward Daniel, lingering just a beat longer than necessary. Emily finally turned, her gaze meeting Claire's with a ferocity that belied her trembling hands. In that moment, the room narrowed to their locked eyes, the history of their relationship compressed into a single frame. Years of resentment, rivalry, and unspoken words hung between them, heavier than any physical object. "Why?" Emily whispered, the question echoing the turmoil in her soul. The walls of the room seemed to lean in, trapping the echoes of her voice. The word hung in the air, demanding an answer, seeking explanation. Why? That carried the weight of years, the burden of secrets. Claire's lips curved into a knowing smile, her eyes gleaming with amusement. She didn't bother to sit, choosing instead to lean against the doorframe, surveying the room as if it were hers. "Why are you here?" Emily pressed, her voice tighter than she intended. The question was a challenge, a declaration of war, but Claire's response was unexpected. "Because," she said, her voice soft yet carrying the conviction of absolute certainty, "this is where I belong." And with those three simple words, the room shifted again. The dynamic that had been teetering on the edge tipped over. Claire's presence, her quiet assertion of ownership, was a direct challenge to Emily. The statement wasn't just about the room. It was a claim on Daniel, on their marriage, on the life that was supposed to be Emily's alone. Emily stared back, her mind grappling to comprehend Claire's audacity. She had anticipated resistance, perhaps scorn, but not this blatant disregard for her position. The room seemed to close in, the plush furnishings pressing against her, suffocating her with their luxurious confines. Daniel awoke to the sound of his own name, spoken with such venomous intent that he flinched. When he turned, he saw Emily sitting up in bed, her eyes wide and intense, her lips parted as though ready to devour him whole. "You know," she continued, her voice devoid of its usual warmth, "some mistakes can't be undone." Daniel sat up quickly, his heart pounding in his chest, a premonition of the coming storm. He could see that Emily wasn't just hurt or angry. There was something else in her eyes, something colder, sharper. It was then he realized he hadn't heard her enter the room. She must have been there for some time, watching him as he slept, waiting to unleash her words like weapons. Daniel forced himself to keep his movements slow, measured, trying to appear unaffected by her tone. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully, reaching out for her, but she drew away from him as if repelled by his touch. "I think," Emily said softly, her eyes never leaving his, "you know exactly what I mean." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken accusations and buried resentments. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the echoes of the previous night, the shattered remnants of their marriage. Daniel looked down at his hands, his knuckles white as he fought to maintain his composure. He knew she was referring to Claire, the storm that had entered their lives just hours ago, stirring emotions he thought he had buried long ago. "Emily," he began, hoping to reach her, to soothe her pain, but she stopped him with a raised hand. "Don't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Just don't pretend you didn't enjoy it, pretend you weren't complicit in it." The accusations hung in the air, cutting deep into Daniel. He wanted to protest, to deny the insinuations in her words, but he knew it would only make things worse. He had seen the look on Claire's face, the way she had touched him, how she had lingered. There was a part of him that had appreciated the attention, a part that had forgotten what it was like to be desired. In that moment of weakness, he had crossed a line he should never have crossed, and now the consequences were tearing his world apart. Emily stepped out of bed, moving away from him as she continued in a low voice that betrayed her inner turmoil. "Why did you let her stay? Why did you allow this?" Daniel felt a surge of protectiveness towards her, a desire to gather her in his arms and whisper reassurances. But he held back. He knew he couldn't fix what had happened, not now, not ever. He could see the pain etched on Emily's face, the vulnerability in her eyes, and he wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance that had suddenly grown between them. But he hesitated, unsure of how to begin. He knew apologies wouldn't bring back the trust that had been broken, and promises were meaningless without actions to follow. At that moment, Daniel understood that the foundation of their marriage was shaken. The cracks had appeared, caused by his own carelessness and a guest who had lingered too long in his bed. As the morning light crept into the room, casting long shadows on the floor, Daniel made a decision. He would leave the room and give Emily space to sort through her feelings. He didn't want to force a conversation, to push her into forgiveness before she was ready. He knew that repairing the damage would take time, effort, and most importantly, trust. But as he reached for the door, he turned back to Emily, his gaze meeting hers, and he spoke quietly. I won't force your forgiveness, Emily, but I hope you can find it in your heart to understand that sometimes people make mistakes. And I promise I will work every day to earn back your trust. With that, he left the suite, stepping into the bustling hotel hallway, where the murmurs of other guests faded into background noise. He was alone. For the first time since the previous evening, Daniel felt the full weight of his actions. Emily, his beautiful wife, was hurting because of him. And though words could not mend the breach, he hoped his love and commitment would. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake off the feeling that their marriage had changed, that the bond he had thought unbreakable had been fractured by forces beyond their control. Meanwhile, in the suite, Emily stood frozen. The door closed behind Daniel, leaving her in suffocating silence. Her gaze fell to the crumpled wedding dress lying in the corner, a silent witness to the previous night's deceit. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the vision of the one thing that Daniel and Claire had in common, her wedding dress. A shared choice that had become a symbol of betrayal. The day that was supposed to mark the beginning of her happily ever after had turned into a nightmare. And as the morning progressed, the weight of that realization pressed down on her, suffocating her with despair. How could she have been so blind? How could she have allowed Claire, of all people, into her marriage bed, thinking it would strengthen the bond between her and Daniel? Instead, it had created a chasm of jealousy, anger, and mistrust that threatened to consume her entirely. As the morning wore on, Emily paced the suite, her mind racing with thoughts of confrontation. She wanted to question Claire, to demand answers, but what would those answers change? The damage was done. The vows exchanged, the trust broken. Each step she took echoed the hollowness in her heart. Time, they say, heals all wounds, but hers felt too raw, too deep. The suite, once a place of anticipation and dreams, now felt like a prison, holding her captive with the ghosts of betrayal. Emily found herself sinking into a vortex of emotions, unable to surface. She thought of the years spent planning this day, imagining the perfect life with Daniel. Now that dream seemed as fragile as glass, shattered beyond repair. In her moments of weakness, she considered running away, escaping the suffocating reality that surrounded her. But where would she go? How could she outrun the pain that was now a part of her? The morning news brought fresh hell. The paparazzi camped outside the hotel, their cameras flashing, hungry for pictures of the bride in crisis. It was a scene straight out of a bad romance novel, and Emily felt trapped in its pages. The privacy that was supposed to shield her and Daniel had failed them, exposing their private turmoil to the world. Emily sank onto the sofa, defeated. The vibrant patterns of the cushions blurred beneath her tearful gaze. The fight was draining her, sapping her strength with each passing moment. The very walls of the suite seemed to mock her, whispering tales of broken vows and shattered dreams. Outside, the city hummed with life, oblivious to the drama unfolding within the hotel walls. Cars honked, people chatted, and children laughed, reminding her of a life she once envisioned, a life that now seemed unattainable. But amidst the turmoil, a new emotion began to stir within Emily, a flicker of determination in the depths of her despair. Though hurt and betrayal threatened to overwhelm her, Emily knew she couldn't let them define her. She was stronger than the pain she felt, wiser than the deceit she'd endured. She had survived the tumultuous waters of her childhood, and she would navigate this too. Do you know what's better than a good mystery, a free one? That's right. You can grab your Kindle or download the free Audible app and start listening today. Last night had been a blur for Claire. A cocktail party, the reception, the first dance, and then a wedding night full of passion and laughter. She remembered little else except for the feel of Daniel's skin, the taste of his kiss, the way he held her close. But now, sitting on the edge of the bed in the luxury suite, Claire realized something was wrong. The room was empty, quiet, and Emily nowhere to be found. It was strange, sure, but perhaps not surprising. After all, Emily was always lurking in the shadows, her dark eyes watching, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. The two women had never been close, not when they grew up, and certainly not now, even though they were united by their bond to Daniel. Claire shrugged off the unease. She had far more important things to think about, like how beautiful she looked in her new dress and how perfect the wedding had been. But the unease didn't go away. And when she didn't find Emily at breakfast, her concern turned to worry. Claire went to the suite's living area. The curtains were drawn, blocking the sunlight. As she approached the bedroom, she heard raised voices, hushed but angry. The door was slightly ajar. On the other side, Claire hesitated, surprised by the sudden knot of fear in her stomach. Before she could knock, the door burst open and Emily stepped out. Her face was pale, her eyes hard, and she was alone. "Where have you been?" Claire asked, feeling a chill despite the warmth of the room. Emily's gaze was cold, unnerving. "It doesn't concern you," she replied, her voice clipped. She turned to leave, then paused. "We need to talk," she said, without looking back. Claire watched her go and then followed, uneasiness turning into suspicion. What had happened to Emily? Why did she look like she hadn't slept? And why was she so hostile? Claire pushed open the bedroom door. Inside, the room was a mess. Clothes were strewn across the floor, the bed was unmade, and 2 suitcases gaped open. On the nightstand, next to the untouched bottle of champagne, sat a crumpled dress. It was the one Claire had worn to the wedding, the one that had once felt like a second skin. Now it looked soiled, its silky texture marred by wrinkles and dust. Claire's eyes narrowed. Had Emily done this? Had she rummaged through her things, insulted her dress? A sudden surge of anger filled Claire, hot and suffocating. She knew Emily had never liked her, but this was crossing a line. "Emily," she called out, her voice shaking with controlled fury. Silence met her. Then she heard a soft sob from the bathroom. Claire pushed the door open and found Emily standing by the sink, her head bent over her hands. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs, and Claire's anger faltered. Concern tugged at her. She wanted to reach out to touch Emily's shoulder, but stopped herself. This was Emily's pain, not hers. So Claire simply stood there, watching, unsure what to say. "Are you okay?" she finally asked, her voice softer than intended. Emily lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed, her cheeks stained with tears. "I'm fine," she said, her voice hoarse. Claire wasn't convinced, but didn't press further. Instead, she moved closer, her gaze falling on the dress in Emily's hands. It was her dress. Emily's grip tightened. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "What are you sorry for?" Claire asked, confused. "I shouldn't have come," Emily said, her voice catching. "What do you mean?" Claire asked, stepping closer. Emily looked up, her eyes pleading. "This weekend? None of this?" she said, gesturing to the room, to the dress, to the mess. "It would have been better if I had never come," she added, her voice cracking. "Why?" Claire whispered, her confusion turning into suspicion. "Why should it have been better if you hadn't come?" Emily hesitated, her gaze flickering away. "Never mind," she said quietly. She let the dress fall from her hands, the silk pooling around her feet. "Don't," Claire said, reaching out. "Please tell me." Emily shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "It doesn't matter," she said, turning away. Claire grabbed her arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Emily," she said firmly, "tell me what's wrong." Emily ripped her arm away, her eyes wide with panic. "Let me go," she whispered urgently. Claire stumbled back, taken aback by Emily's sudden outburst. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Claire stared at her, bewildered by the raw emotion in Emily's eyes. Fear, sadness, desperation, they all swirled together in a way that made Claire's heart ache. Suddenly, understanding dawned on her. It was like a punch to the gut, stealing the breath from her lungs. Could it be true? Was that what Emily's strange behavior was about? Her anger, her hostility, her tears? Claire felt a wave of sympathy wash over her. If it was true, then Emily's pain must have been real, deep. And Claire, in her own pain, had only caused more hurt. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered, taking a step forward. "I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Emily," she added, reaching out. Emily flinched, but stayed rooted to the spot. "I wish I had never come," she whispered, her voice breaking. Claire nodded, tears pricking her eyes. She understood now. It wasn't just the wedding, the dress, the jealousy. There was something deeper, something darker lurking beneath Emily's anger. And for the first time, Claire saw not a rival, but a hurting soul. As the hours passed, the tension in the room thickened, suffocating them both. Claire sat by the window, her eyes fixed on the distant hills, her mind a storm of emotions. Beside her, Emily paced, her steps slow, her head bowed. Neither spoke, but the silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was filled with unspoken understanding, shared grief. The weight of Emily's revelation pressed on Claire's chest, making it hard to breathe. She thought of the past year, the subtle hints, the jealous glances, the cutting remarks, and she realized she had been blind. How could she not have seen what was right in front of her? The guilt was like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Suddenly the door burst open, startling them both. A young detective stood in the doorway, his expression serious, his eyes scanning the room. "Miss Blackwood," he said, addressing Claire, "we need to talk about what happened last night." Claire turned, her heart sinking. She had known this moment would come, but the reality of it was more daunting than she had imagined. With Emily's secret now out in the open, the truth would come crashing down, shattering the fragile peace that had settled over the room. As Claire rose to her feet, her gaze met Emily's. In that moment there were no rivals, no secrets, only two women bound by a tragedy they had failed to see coming. Together they faced the music, knowing that the consequences of their actions would resonate far beyond the walls of the hotel room. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and share it with your friends. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Daniel awoke to an unsettling stillness. Sunlight streamed through the parted curtains, painting stripes on the bed where he lay. But the usual morning sounds were absent, replaced by a disconcerting quiet. Where was Emily? A chill ran down his spine, unusual for such a bright, cloudless day. He glanced at the untouched breakfast tray on the small table beside the bed, the remnants of last night's dinner still on the knitstand. Panic started to rise in his throat. He called out for Emily, his voice echoing in the large suite. No answer. He threw off the covers, his bare feet hitting the plush carpet. His eyes scanned the room, finding nothing out of the ordinary except for the absence of his new wife. On the dressing table, her wedding dress lay rumpled, abandoned like a discarded dream. Fear twisted in Daniel's gut. He had hoped the previous night had been a drunken mistake, a consequence of Claire's insistence on celebrating, but Emily's absence confirmed his worst fears. Had she left him? But why? The thought of facing his family with this news sent a fresh wave of panic through him. Was Claire still in the room? He rushed to the bedroom door, flinging it open and stepping out into the hallway. It was empty. As he hurried down the corridor, a sense of foreboding pressed against him like a shroud. Where was Emily? What had happened to her? The pristine white walls of the hallway seemed to mock him, reflecting back the growing terror in his eyes. This was supposed to be a day of celebration. How could everything have gone so wrong in just a few hours? He reached the suite next door, a wave of relief washing over him. There she was, leaning against the wall, her eyes distant. As he rushed towards her, hope surged through him, quickly followed by a pang of guilt. Seeing the turmoil in his eyes, she straightened up, her own face betraying nothing. Emily pushed away the turmoil within her, striving for composure. "You weren't in our room?" Daniel said, his voice tight. Relief flooded Emily, or perhaps it was the satisfaction of seeing his worry mirrored in his eyes. "I needed some fresh air." She gestured to the suite next door, a subtle hint of accusation in her tone. Daniel hesitated, realizing the depth of his mistake. "We need to talk," he whispered, reaching out to touch her, but she flinched away, creating a gulf between them. "Not here," she said, her voice low. "Alone." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Back in the suite, the weight of the previous night pressed down on them. Emily watched him pace, his energy crackling with nervous energy. Her initial shock had morphed into a chilling calm. She knew exactly what she wanted, and Daniel's guilt only fueled her resolve. "We can fix this," Daniel said, stopping abruptly, meeting her gaze. "No, we can't." Emily's voice was devoid of emotion, sending a shiver down Daniel's spine. She crossed the room, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes locked onto his. "You were with her last night," she stated, not a question. Daniel dropped his head, unable to meet her eyes. The truth hung between them, suffocating the room. "It was a mistake," he murmured, his shoulders slumping. "Don't lie to me," Emily's voice broke the silence. The room echoed with her words, amplifying his guilt. "I'm sorry," he whispered, lifting his head, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I know," Emily replied, her voice flat. "That's not enough." Her words were like shards of ice, piercing his skin, tearing at his heart. He wanted to explain, to convince her that he loved only her, but the words caught in his throat. What use were promises now? The trust was shattered, the vows meaningless. The cool air from the open window swirled around them, carrying away his excuses, leaving behind only regret and the specter of separation. Emily's grip tightened on the dress in her hands, its silk texture no longer comforting. She was acutely aware of the distance between them, a chasm growing wider with each passing moment. Her voice shook slightly as she spoke, but her eyes remained resolute. "We can't continue like this, pretending that nothing happened, that I didn't find you with her." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of traffic from the street below. Daniel closed his eyes, picturing the events of the previous night, the music, the merriment, and Claire's insistent charm. His internal struggle was evident in the lines etched on his forehead, the slight tremor in his hands. He wanted to reach out to Emily, to bridge the gap, but fear held him back. He had never seen her like this, her face pale, her eyes devoid of warmth. The lively, vibrant woman he had married was replaced by a stranger who seemed to have stepped out of a fairy tale, but it was a fairy tale gone wrong. With malice as its theme, he could see the hurt in her eyes, the pain she tried so hard to conceal, and he knew he had caused it. Shame burned in his chest, hot and bitter. Emily continued, her voice gaining strength. "We can either try to repair what's broken or move forward separately." Her words hung in the air, stark and final. Daniel's eyes snapped open, the gravity of her words settling upon him. Repair what's broken. Was it too late for that? Could he ever regain her trust? Or was this the end of their story before it truly began? The silence deepened, stretching between them like a taut wire. Daniel felt the weight of Emily's words, understood their truth, but could he accept it? The turmoil within him was a battlefield, love and guilt warring with fear and uncertainty. Finally he spoke, his voice raspy with emotion. "How do you want this?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. It was a surrender, a recognition of his misstep, and Emily knew it. For a moment, the room was silent save for the soft breeze rustling through the trees outside. Emily took a deep breath, gathering her emotions. The battle within her had been fought and won. She was left drained but resolute. "I want space," she said quietly. The word echoed in the vast room, a single note of finality. Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes filled with understanding. He knew that this was the best choice, the kindest thing to do. "Of course," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll give you all the time you need." The following days were an awkward dance of apologies and explanations. Daniel, laden with guilt, tried to win back the affection he had so carelessly thrown away. Yet Emily remained distant, creating a barrier between them. Despite the grandeur of the estate, the opulence of its halls, and the whisperings of servants, Emily felt utterly alone. She shuttled between her family home and her own apartment, seeking solace in the familiarity of her surroundings. She spent hours walking along the beach, letting the salty waves whip against her face, cleansing her with the tongue of the sea. Though she occasionally encountered Daniel, their interactions were stiff, laced with the remnants of their failed marriage. One evening, while strolling through the town, she stumbled upon an antique jewelry shop. Intrigued, she stepped inside, drawn to the tinkling of a nearby bell. Among the trinkets and treasures, she discovered a small silver locket nestled in a velvet box. Its intricate design and faded elegance captivated her. As she opened it, a miniature portrait of a young girl smiling brightly fell into her palm. Emily felt an inexplicable connection to the locket and slipped it around her neck. It became a daily fixture, a tangible reminder of a simpler time before deceit and disillusionment had taken root. The weeks blurred into months, each day chipping away at Emily's resolve. Daniel, true to his word, had given her space, but the hollowness within her persisted. The guilt he expressed was sincere, but could she ever forgive him? Or was the breach in their trust too wide to span?